1552. 2,000 ordinary Hungarians, shopkeepers who'd never held swords, farmers who knew plows better than pikes, mothers clutching kitchen knives stared down from castle walls at 40,000 Ottoman warriors, the finest siege army on earth, soldiers who'd conquered 3 continents, men who'd never lost a fortress siege, ever. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. 1 defender for every 20 attackers. By every law of medieval warfare, Eger Castle should have fallen in days. Instead, what happened over the next 38 days would shatter Ottoman invincibility and prove that sometimes desperation is the deadliest weapon of all. These weren't professional soldiers. These were bakers who turned their ovens into forges of war, mothers who chose to fight rather than watch their children sold into slavery, 8-year-old boys who became the difference between survival and annihilation. You're about to witness how ordinary people achieved what trained armies couldn't, stopping the unstoppable Ottoman war machine dead in its tracks through boiling water, burning wheels, and courage that defied every rational calculation. If Eger fell, Vienna was next. All of Christian Europe hung in the balance on this single fortress. The defenders knew this with bone-deep certainty. They also knew surrender meant slavery for their children, death for their men, worse for their women. So they made a choice that would echo through centuries, a choice that had nothing to do with military strategy and everything to do with love. The year 1552 found Hungary bleeding between 2 empires. The Austrian Habsburgs pulled from the west, the Ottoman Empire crushed from the east. Like a wishbone pulled from both ends, the kingdom was fracturing. In the fortress town of Eger, Captain István Dobo, just 32 but already scarred by decades of border warfare, watched the horizon with growing dread. His wife touched his shoulder. "The rumors?" she asked quietly. He nodded, unable to speak. They were coming. The Ottoman Empire under Suleiman the Magnificent had reached its apex, controlling lands from Baghdad to Budapest, from Cairo to the Crimea. Their military machine had perfected siege warfare into lethal art. In 50 years, they had never lost a major siege, not once. The Ottomans had a saying, "Where the Sultan's cannons speak, walls listen." And history proved them right. Their massive siege artillery could reduce stone fortifications to rubble and dust. Their Janissary Corps Christian boys, taken as children, raised as Muslim warrior slaves, were the elite forces of their age. Their supply system could sustain armies of 100,000 men for months without faltering. Eger Castle stood like a lonely sentinel guarding the road to Upper Hungary, and beyond that, Austria itself. The castle was modest, its walls aging, built for an earlier century's warfare. Dobo commanded exactly 300 professional soldiers. The rest of his 2,000 defenders? Refugees who'd fled the Ottoman advance, farmers whose lands had been burned, merchants whose trade routes had been severed, women and children with nowhere else to run. Among these unlikely warriors stood 2 people who would prove crucial. Eva Sisi, a merchant's wife who'd organized the women into work brigades for maintaining supplies and caring for wounded. And Gergely Bornemissa, a minor noble with engineering talent and a dangerous fascination with gunpowder. "God gave us fire," he once told Dobo. "I'm just improving his design." As September dawned, Dobo gathered his unlikely army in the courtyard. Professional soldiers stood beside farmers still learning to hold spears properly. Housewives practiced loading crossbows with trembling hands. Children as young as 8 were organized into ammunition, running teams because every hand would be needed. The captain's orders were simple but absolute. "We hold here, or Hungary holds nowhere." But what force could possibly threaten this remote Hungarian castle enough to demand such desperate measures? The Ottoman army that approached Eger in September 1552 was a masterpiece of military organization and overwhelming power. At its heart marched 15,000 Janissaries, the legendary slave soldiers who'd never lost a siege. These weren't ordinary troops. Taken as boys through the Devshirme system, they were raised from childhood for one purpose: perfect warfare. They didn't marry, they didn't own property, they lived only to fight and win for the Sultan. Behind them rolled 16 massive siege cannons, each weighing 3 tons. The largest could hurl 150-pound stone balls that would punch through 6 feet of solid wall like parchment. The artillery train alone required 500 oxen to move. Ottoman military engineers had calculated exactly how many cannonballs were needed to create a practical breach in medieval walls, 300 shots per section. The mathematics of destruction were precise and proven. The supply train stretched for miles, 2,000 camels carrying enough powder, shot, and provisions to maintain siege operations through winter if necessary. The Ottomans had learned from centuries of conquest that wars were won by logistics as much as courage. Leading this host were Ahmed Pasha and Ali Pasha, two commanders who despised each other personally but united in absolute confidence. They'd taken dozens of fortresses together across 3 continents. Eger, with its aged walls and civilian defenders, would be routine, perhaps a week of bombardment, one major assault, then the inevitable surrender. Inside Eger, Dobo faced reality with brutal clarity. His 300 professional soldiers were mostly light cavalry and infantry who'd survived previous Ottoman encounters. They knew what was coming, and that knowledge showed in their eyes. But the other 1,700 defenders were civilians who'd been training for mere weeks. How do you transform a baker into a soldier? A mother into a warrior? You don't. You give them something worth dying for. The women, led by Eva Sisi, had organized into specialized units with surprising efficiency. Some would manage the boiling oil and water stations, kitchen warfare scaled up to military dimensions. Others would serve as battlefield medics and ammunition carriers. Your kitchens are now armories, Sisi told them during training sessions. Your cooking pots are now weapons. The women practiced in shifts, learning to pour boiling liquids from walls without burning themselves, timing their movements between enemy arrow volleys. Many wept during practice, understanding what these skills would soon be used for. Gergely Bornemissa worked feverishly in the castle's makeshift workshop, experimenting with something new, wheels packed with gunpowder and metal fragments that could be rolled downhill into attacking formations. The design was simple but untested, brilliant but potentially suicidal. If it works, he told his assistants, we turn their numbers against them. If it doesn't, he never finished that sentence. The castle's defenses were modest by contemporary standards. Its walls, built in the 14th century, were designed for an earlier age of warfare. Against modern Ottoman cannons, stone was merely an inconvenience, not a true barrier. The garrison possessed 40 small cannons, toys, compared to Ottoman siege guns. Their gunpowder supplies would last perhaps 2 weeks of heavy fighting if they were careful. After that, prayers and improvisation. But Eger possessed hidden strengths that no military engineer could quantify. The castle sat on a rocky hill, making mining operations difficult and slow. Its water supply came from an internal well that couldn't be poisoned or cut off during siege, and the approach routes were narrow, preventing the Ottomans from bringing their full numerical advantage to bear at once. On September 9th, Ottoman scouts appeared on the horizon like distant storm clouds. By September 11th, the entire army had arrived in terrible majesty. Defenders watched from walls as 40,000 men made camp, their tents spreading across the valley like a canvas city that stretched to the horizon. The sound of their preparation wheels creaking, officers shouting commands in Turkish, the ring of hammers on metal carried clearly to the castle. That night, Ottoman heralds approached under flag of truce. Their message was simple and final. Surrender now, and you may leave with your lives. Resist, and watch your families die slowly. Dobo's response was equally simple. Come and take us. Dawn on September 11th began with thunder not from the sky, but from Ottoman cannons announcing their presence with devastating authority. 16 siege guns fired in sequence, their 3-ton frames lurching backward with each shot like angry beasts. The very stones of Eger trembled. On the walls, civilians who'd never experienced bombardment learned what true fear meant. Each cannonball impact sent stone fragments flying like deadly hail, scything through anyone unlucky enough to be near. Dust clouds rose like phantoms, coating everything in choking gray powder. By noon, 50 balls had struck the eastern wall. The mathematical certainty of destruction had begun its inexorable work. But Dobo had prepared his people for this psychological assault. Stone breaks, he told them, walking the walls calmly, while hell rained down. We bend. The defenders adapted with desperate speed. Women and children formed bucket brigades, not for water, but for earth and timber to shore up damaged sections. When cannons fired, spotters shouted warnings. Defenders learned to read the rhythm: load, aim, fire, impact. In those precious seconds between shots, they moved, worked, lived. Days 4 through 7 brought the first probing attacks. Ottoman irregulars, expendable troops used to test defenses and locate weak points, approached with scaling ladders. Here, the civilians had their first taste of actual combat and the horrifying reality of taking human life. A farmer named Joseph, who'd been practicing with a crossbow for only 3 weeks, made the first kill. His bolt caught an Ottoman soldier in the throat at 30 paces. His hands shook so badly afterward that his wife had to help him reload while he vomited over the wall. But then something unexpected happened that would change the entire character of the siege. The women, led by Eva Sese, appeared on the walls carrying cauldrons of boiling water mixed with quicklime, a substance that burned like liquid fire and clung to skin and armor alike. As Ottoman troops reached the tops of their ladders, the women stepped forward without hesitation. What they poured down transformed men into screaming torches. The sounds that followed echoed across both armies, a horror that made even hardened janissaries pause. Warriors who'd faced death in a dozen campaigns fled from housewives armed with kitchen implements. Can you imagine the shock? Elite soldiers running from civilian women? Bornemissa used these early attacks to test his innovations with scientific precision. His first experimental bomb, a clay pot filled with gunpowder and metal scraps, proved devastating when dropped on clustered enemies below. But his real breakthrough came by accident, as the best inventions often do. A wooden wheel, set alight and packed with explosives, broke free from its mounting and rolled down the hill into Ottoman ranks. The random, bouncing path of the burning wheel caused more panic than any aimed weapon could have. Men dove aside, crashed into each other, broke formation. Bornemissa watched with growing excitement, his mind already racing ahead to larger, more lethal designs. By day 8, the pattern was brutally clear. Days meant bombardment, a steady rhythm of destruction that had opened visible cracks in Eger's walls. By day 14, over 3,000 cannonballs had struck the castle. Defenders counted them obsessively, using the Ottomans' own ammunition to reinforce damaged sections wherever possible. But nights brought a different war, one that haunted defenders' dreams. Ottoman miners, working by torchlight deep underground, began tunneling toward the walls. The defenders could hear them picks striking stone in the darkness below, getting closer each night. Dobo assigned his best listeners, including several musicians with trained ears, to track the underground approach by sound alone. Countermining began immediately. Hungarian diggers, led by mining engineers from the nearby mountains, dug their own tunnels to intercept the enemy. What followed were the war's strangest battles, knife fights 30 feet underground in spaces so tight men could barely swing their arms, killing each other in absolute darkness by touch and sound alone. Bornemissa experimented with smoking out enemy tunnels, with flooding them, and finally with explosive charges that collapsed them entirely, burying attackers and defenders alike. The first 2 weeks established a brutal rhythm that ground down both sides. By day, bombardment and assault. By night, the underground war and desperate repairs. Between it all came the constant work of survival, tending wounded, cooking meals, sleeping in shifts. The civilians were transforming in ways that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. Fear remained, but routine created its own strange courage. Women who'd fainted at the first cannon fire now worked calmly through bombardments. Children learned to sleep despite the thunder. On September 25th, the Ottomans attempted their first major assault with 5,000 troops, attacking simultaneously from 3 directions. For 6 hours, the walls swarmed with ladders, grappling hooks, and climbing men. Civilians fought alongside soldiers using anything that could kill: rocks, boiling oil, improvised spears, even furniture thrown from heights. When one section nearly fell, Dobo himself led the countercharge, his family's sword cutting through Ottoman elite troops with desperate fury. The assault failed, but everyone knew it was just a probe, a test of defenses before the real killing blow. Ottoman engineers had identified weak points. Their miners reported progress. Artillery had created promising cracks in the eastern wall. In the Ottoman camp, confidence remained unshaken. They'd lost perhaps 500 men, acceptable casualties for reconnaissance and force. The defenders looked exhausted. Their walls were crumbling, their ammunition clearly running low. Ali Pasha told his officers with calm certainty. Another week of bombardment, then we take it. But on September 29th, everything changed. The real battle, the one that would decide Hungary's fate, was about to begin, and neither side was prepared for what desperation would unleash.